My name is Maren Okafor. I built Marigold for 8 years. One Tuesday, I badged into my own building, and the reader blinked red. I didn't knock twice. I stepped aside and held the door for the courier behind me, and I walked in on his badge, not mine. By then, the founder wall had already been changed. My photo was gone. The CEO's was up before the vote was even public. And at the all hands, in front of 31 people, he said it to my face. "You built a nice feature, Maren. I'm building a company." They slid a severance across the table, an INDA, and a goodbye email they'd already written in my voice. They gave me 72 hours. I only needed one. But not for the reason they thought. If you ever gave years to something that tried to erase your name, this story is for you. Before I go on, subscribe and comment the city you're building from. I want to see how far this one travels. Now let me tell it from the beginning, because the ending doesn't land unless you understand what the 8 years cost. I'm telling you this a year later. I'm calm now. I want you to hear that in my voice. There's no shaking in me anymore, no heat behind the eyes, just the facts, laid down flat, the way you'd lay tools on a bench. Because the truth doesn't need me to be angry. It just needs me to say it plainly. Marigold is a payments platform for home care workers. That's the whole thing. It gets the aides, the caregivers, the people who show up at somebody's door and lift somebody's father out of a bed paid on time. Not 30 days later, not 6 weeks later, on time. That sounds small. It isn't. If you've ever waited on money you already earned, you know it isn't small at all. I built it because of my dad. He was sick for 2 years at the end. Cancer, then the things that come after cancer. I moved back into his house in Austin, and I learned what nobody tells you about caregiving. It isn't the big dramatic moments. It's the daily grind of it. It's the pills sorted into the little plastic days of the week. It's the sheets. It's the way a strong man gets quiet when he can't do a thing he used to do without thinking. We had an aide. Her name was Rosa. She came 4 days a week, and she was better at this than I was, and she was kinder than the situation deserved. She washed my father's hair in the sink, and she made him laugh when I couldn't. And she went 6 weeks without a paycheck. 6 weeks. The agency had a billing problem, they said, a processing delay, a software thing. Rosa still showed up every one of those days. She still washed his hair. She had 2 kids and a rent payment, and she was floating a stranger's father on her own back while some company sat on her money. I remember standing in my dad's kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, and I thought, this is a bug. This is a fixable thing. People are treating this like weather, like something that just happens, and it's not. It's just code nobody bothered to write. My dad died on a Thursday in the fall. Rosa came to the service. I paid her out of my own pocket for the weeks the agency never covered, and she cried, and she told me I didn't have to, and I told her yes, I did. I wrote the first version of Marigold in the 8 months after the funeral. In his house, at his kitchen table, with the marigolds from his garden going brown outside the window, because I wasn't the gardener he was. He grew marigolds every year, orange and gold, all along the back fence. Said they kept the bugs off the tomatoes. Said a garden should have something in it that's just for looking at. I dug up one of his plants before I sold the house. Put it in a clay pot. That pot has sat on my desk at Marigold from the first day we had a desk. Everybody who ever worked with me knows that plant. Orange marigold, my father's, in a plain clay pot. That's where the name came from. Not a brand exercise. Not a focus group. My dad's back fence. I wrote the first product myself. Every line of it. I'm an engineer, that's my hands. That's what I do. And when it was too big for one person, I started hiring. And I made every one of the first 30 hires by hand. I mean that literally. I read every resume. I sat across from every single person. I didn't hand it off to a recruiter and I didn't rush it. because I knew what we were building, and I knew who I wanted in the room. And I had a thing I did with every hire. On their first day, I'd walk them past the Marigold, and I'd tell them the Rosa story in about 90 seconds, and then I'd say the same thing to every one of them. I'd say, your equity is a promise. The day the promise dies, you owe this place nothing. You walk. I mean it. Don't stay out of guilt. Stay because you believe it. I said that to 31 people over 8 years. I said it so many times it became a joke. New hires would get warned by the old ones. She's going to do the Marigold speech. Just let her do it. I didn't care that it was a joke. I meant every word every time. I want you to hold on to that speech. It matters later. Grant Whitfield came in year 3. I need to be fair about Grant, because the story only works if I'm fair. He was good at things I was bad at. I could build the thing. I could not walk into a room full of investors and make them feel like they were getting in early on the future. Grant could. He had a voice for it. He had the suit and the handshake and the way of saying our numbers back to a room that made the numbers sound like destiny. We split it clean. He ran the business. I ran the product and the engineering. He was CEO, I was CTO, and I owned 31%. And for a good while it worked. I want to be honest that it worked. I liked him in the early years. I thought we were a set of hands and a mouth, and every company needs both. Here's what I missed, and I'll own it, because my blind spot is part of why this happened. I assumed loyalty flowed up the cap table, that the people who owned the most cared the most, and the rest would fall in line behind them. I thought a company was a stack, and the strength ran top to bottom. It doesn't. It runs sideways, through the people. I learned that the hard way, and it's the whole point of this story, so I'm telling you now so you can watch it happen. There were 2 documents that mattered. I didn't know they mattered at the time. That's how these things always go. The first was from 2021. We did a small bridge round, just to get us across a gap. And Grant handled the paperwork, because Grant handled the paperwork. Buried in the amendment was a clause, a bad leaver clause. Reverse vesting on the founder's shares, triggered if a founder left not in good standing, with good standing defined by, of all people, the board. Grant told me it was nothing. He said, it's just to make the banks comfortable, Maren. Standard, they like to see it. I was mid-sprint on a release. I read it the way you read the terms on an app. I signed. That clause is going to matter more than almost anything else I ever wrote. The second document came near the end, the Series C term sheet. $48 million from Northlight Ventures, led by a partner named Bram Kessler. And in that term sheet were 2 conditions I actually did read, because by then I read everything. One was a key team retention condition. It said at least 80% of engineering had to stay for 12 months after the close, or the deal terms changed hard against us. The other was a material adverse change clause. Standard language. If something happened between signing and closing that materially damaged the company, the money could walk. Bram Kessler read spreadsheets. He was very good at spreadsheets. He never once read a room. Remember that. Now, months before any of the rest of this, I did something I'm glad I did. I sent the board an email. Doug Feld was the board chair, an early investor, a man whose entire personality was arranged around never being the one to blame. I wrote to the whole board, and I said in plain words that we were about to make a mistake, that the pressure to look like a bigger, more grown-up company was pushing us toward gutting the thing that actually made us work, which was the trust of the people who ran it. I wrote, and I remember the line because I chose it carefully, if you break the team's faith in this place, you break the company. The team is not a cost line. The team is the load-bearing beam. Nobody replied. Doug Feld didn't reply. It sat in an inbox and it did nothing. Or so it looked. Hold on to that email too. It's still on a server. It's dated. It says exactly what I told you it says. The pushing out didn't happen all at once. That's not how these things work. It happens in small moves, each one small enough that reacting to it would make you look paranoid. That's the trick of it. Any one thing on its own, you'd let go. It's only when you line them up that you see the shape. The first one I almost didn't notice. The org chart got quietly redrawn. I found out because a new engineer, sweet kid, asked me an innocent question about a reporting line, and I pulled up the chart to answer him, and the boxes had moved. Not dramatically, just enough. A couple of teams that had reported through me now reported through a VP who reported to Grant. And I thought, I made a note to ask Grant about it, and then a release caught fire and I forgot. Then the term sheet thread. The Northlight negotiation had been running for weeks, and I'd been on every email. Then I wasn't. A whole run of messages went by that I only heard about secondhand. When I asked Grant, he was warm about it. He was always warm. He said, "We're just keeping the room small, Maren. You know how these guys are. Too many voices spooks them. It's all stuff you'd find boring anyway. It's the money side. Keeping the room small." That was the phrase. I let it go, because pushing on it would have made me the difficult founder, and I'd spent 8 years not being the difficult founder. That's move one. My title on a chart, quietly. My name off a thread, quietly. Small, private, no witnesses. File it. The second move had one witness. It was a board meeting. I was presenting the product roadmap, which was my job, and it was a good roadmap, and Grant let me finish it, and then Grant reframed me. That's the only word for it. He did it smoothly, the way he did everything. He said, and Bram Kessler was on the video call nodding along, he said, "This is exactly why Maren is our 0 to 1 person. Nobody takes something from nothing to a real product like she does. 0 to 1. Do you hear it? It sounds like a compliment. It is a sentence that ends your career. Because the next thing you say after she's the 0 to 1 person is, and now we need a 1 to 100 person, and that person is not you. He didn't even have to say the second part. He just let it hang there, and Bram nodded, and then Grant floated it. Light as anything. As we scale into the Series C, I think there's a real conversation about a co-CEO structure. Somebody who's built at scale before. Take some of the operating load off Maren so she can go back to what she loves, which is the product. Take the load off. Go back to what she loves. In front of Bram and Doug Feld and the rest of them, he handed me a demotion wrapped in a spa day. I didn't fight it in the room. I want you to notice that, because it's who I am, and it matters. I stayed dry. I said something about being open to whatever structure serves the company, and I moved on. Some people would say I should have set it on fire right there. Maybe, but I don't work that way, and anyway, in the room, with Bram nodding, I already understood I'd lost that room. Fighting for a room you've already lost just gives them the tape they need to call you emotional. So that's move 2. One witness. Actually, several witnesses, and not one of them stood up for me, and I filed that too. The third move was public, and it's the one you came for, and it's the one I still see when I close my eyes. The all hands. We did them every month, whole company, and I'd stood at the front of 100 of them. This one I walked into like any other, coffee in my hand, and I noticed people not quite looking at me, and I thought it was in my head. Then I saw the wall. We had a founder wall by the front doors. 2 photos. Day 1, me and Grant, and under them the little line about starting the company. My photo was gone. Not moved. Gone. In its place was a picture of Grant alone, and under it, Grant Whitfield, founder and chief executive. Present tense. Already framed. Already hung, with the little wire and the level bump they use. Which means somebody had done that with a hammer, on purpose before I walked in, knowing I'd walk past it. And I'm standing there, holding my coffee, doing the math, and Grant is at the front of the room, and he starts talking about an exciting new chapter and the leadership structure that's going to carry us through the Series C and beyond. And I realize, standing in a room of my own people, that I am finding out about my own removal at the same time as the interns. There was no meeting, no call, no decency. Just learn it in public, with everyone watching your face. Someone had their phone up. There's always a phone up now. And Grant, riding the moment, feeling like the operator the money finally respected, turned it partly toward me. And he said it. He said, "Look, Maren did incredible early work. She built a nice feature. But I'm building a company. She built a nice feature. 8 years. My father's Marigolds. Rosa's 6 weeks. Every one of the 30 people in that room hired by my own hand across that table. A nice feature. 31 people heard it. One of them was recording. Grant didn't know that yet. Neither did I. Hold on to the phone. It comes back. What did I do? I'll tell you exactly what I did, and it's the least dramatic thing in this whole story. I said nothing. I set my coffee down on the nearest desk because my hand wasn't entirely steady, and I didn't want anyone to see that. And I looked around the room, slowly, at the faces. Jonah in the back, employee number 1, jaw set. Tasha with her hand over her mouth. Priya just staring at the floor. I looked at my people, and I let them see me be calm. And then I walked out, because there was nothing to say that the room wasn't already saying for me. What came next was the small stuff, the petty stuff. And honestly, the petty stuff told me more about Grant than the big betrayal did. Because the big betrayal you can dress up as strategy. The petty stuff is just cruelty with nothing on top. I went back the next morning, the Tuesday I opened with, badged in, and the reader blinked red. My own building. 8 years. Red light. That's when I held the door for the courier and walked in on somebody else's access, because I'll be damned if I'd stand outside knocking on a door I paid for. Reception, my nameplate, the one from my office door, was in a cardboard box on the front counter. Not handed to me, not couriered to my house. Set on a counter, in a box, where anyone walking in could see the CTO's name in a box, like a returned pair of shoes. I went up anyway. I sat down at my desk, which was still my desk for another few hours, and I opened Slack to message my team. And while I was typing, mid-sentence, mid-word almost, the app kicked me out. Deactivated, I watched the little cursor of my own unsent sentence disappear. Somebody in an office somewhere clicked a button, and I stopped existing on the company's own system while I was in the middle of talking to the people I hired. That's a choice. Someone chose the timing. Someone thought, do it now, while she's typing. That's not process. That's a message. The Marigold was still on the desk. My father's Marigold. I picked up the pot. I'm not too proud to tell you, that was the moment my throat closed. Not the badge, not the wall, not the nice feature. The plant. I picked up my dead father's Marigold, and I carried it downstairs past my own name in a box. And Delia was waiting for me. Delia Osei. VP of People. She's the one who does this part. She's not the villain, exactly. She's the person who keeps her own seat by carrying the villain's paperwork. And I've thought a lot about whether that's better or worse, and I still don't know. She walked me into a small conference room, the ugly one with no windows that we use for hard conversations. And there were papers on the table, squared up neat. And there was a lawyer I didn't recognize. And there was Grant, who couldn't even look at the Marigold in my hands. Delia did the talking. She was gentle about it, which somehow made it worse. She slid the first document across. Severance, $880,000, which is not nothing, and they knew it wasn't nothing, and the number was chosen to feel like a lot to a person who's scared, and to feel like a rounding error to the company it was buying silence from. The second document was the ENDA, non-disparagement. I could never say what I just said to you. Not the wall, not the badge, not nice feature, not the box on the counter. Sign, take the money, and the 8 years become a story I'm legally forbidden to tell. The third document is the one I still can't quite believe they did. It was an email, printed out, already written, from me, in my voice. A warm, gracious goodbye to the whole company, all about how proud I was, how it was time for me to move on to my next chapter, how Grant had my full confidence, and the future had never been brighter. They wrote my goodbye for me. They studied how I talk, and they faked it, and all I had to do was send it from my own account, so that 31 people would believe the woman they watched get erased was happy about it. Delia said, quietly, "We just need you to send this before end of day. It makes the transition smoother for everyone." For everyone. Sure. And then the lawyer explained the last part. And this is where the first document from 2021 came home. Remember the bad lever clause. The one Grant said was nothing, just to make the banks comfortable. The board had voted me out, not in good standing. Which meant the clause fired. Which meant my 31%, the 31% I'd carried from an empty kitchen table for 8 years, reverse vested down to about 4%. They didn't just take my title and my badge and my name off the wall. They took the ownership too, and they took it with my own signature from 3 years back, a signature Grant had walked me into while telling me it didn't mean anything. You want to know if there was a legal way out? I looked. Believe me, I looked. That's the first place a person like me goes. The clean way, the paperwork way, the way where you win in a conference room and never have to feel anything in front of anyone. There wasn't one. The bad lever clause was airtight. I'd signed it. The board had the authority. The route where the quiet clause in the contract saves the hero at the last minute, the one you're maybe waiting for right now, that route was dead. They killed it in 2021, and I helped them. They gave me 72 hours to sign all 3. I took the Marigold, and I went home. Now I need to slow down, because this next part is the whole hinge of it, and if I rush it, you won't feel it. I sat at my own kitchen table, in my own house, with 3 documents and a browned-out Marigold. The plant had been on that desk for a week while all this happened, some days without water, and half the leaves had gone brown and crisp at the edges. My father's plant, dying in a clay pot, because I'd been too busy being erased to water it. I watered it, first thing. Before I read a single page, I filled a glass at my own sink, and I poured it slow into the pot, and I watched the dry soil drink it, and I thought about Rosa washing my father's hair, and I thought about how the whole reason this company existed was that I once decided a thing everyone treated like weather was actually a fixable bug. Then I read the goodbye email they wrote in my voice. Start to finish. I read the version of me they needed me to be. Grateful, diminished, gone quietly. Happy about it. And here's where I saw the real choice. And it was cleaner and crueler than any lawyer could make it. It came down to 2 roads. Road 1. Sign. Take the 180,000. Send their email. Keep the money and the non-disparagement and my nice clean exit. And lie. Tell 31 people I trained, in my own words, that this was fine, that I was happy. That the man who called 8 years a nice feature had my full confidence. Keep the money. Sell the truth. And Rosa, and my father, and every first day speech about equity being a promise, all of it becomes a thing I sold for 180 grand and a piece of paper telling me to stay quiet. Road 2. Don't sign. Keep nothing. Not the money, not the 4%, not the clean exit. Keep one thing only. My name. The right to say the true thing in my own true voice. That's the choice. And I want to be honest with you, because if I pretend it was easy, I'm cheating you. $180,000 is real. My mortgage is real. The fear was real. I sat with it for a long time, and the Marigold sat there drinking its water and going hour by hour, a little less brown. And somewhere in that long night, the narration in my own head turned. It stopped being about the wound. The badge, the box, the wall, the nice feature, all of it stopped being a thing done to me and started being a thing I got to answer. Because they'd made one mistake, and it was the same mistake Grant made every day of his life. He thought the company was the cap table. He thought if he owned the shares and hung his photo on the wall, he owned the thing. But I knew what the thing actually was. The thing was 31 people. The thing was hands, not shares. And I had spent 8 years, on 31 first mornings, telling every one of those people the exact same sentence. Your equity is a promise. The day the promise dies, you owe this place nothing. You walk. I mean it. I'd said it as a gift. I never once said it as a weapon. I never needed to. But sitting there at that table, I understood that I'd spent 8 years handing every person in that building the exact permission they'd need on the day this happened. I didn't have to call anyone to mutiny. I would never do that. I wouldn't ask a single person to risk a single mortgage for me. That's not the promise. The promise was the opposite. The promise was, you don't owe me anything, and you don't owe them anything either. So the 72 hours ran, and on the morning the first one was almost up, I made my choice, and it took about the length of 1 cup of coffee. I did not sign the severance, $180,000, and I let it sit there. I declined the ENDA. I would not sell the right to tell you this, and I did not send their email. The gracious, grateful, lying goodbye in my stolen voice never went out. Not one person ever received the version of me they built. Instead, I opened a blank message. Not a call to arms, not an ask, not help me or fight them or quit. I wrote the truth plainly, the way I'm telling it to you now. I wrote what the org chart did. I wrote about the term sheet thread I got dropped from. I wrote about the co-CEO conversation. I wrote about the founder wall and the photo that was swapped and hung with a level before I even walked in. I wrote the nice feature line, word for word, because 31 people heard it anyway. I wrote about the badge and the box and the Slack cutting me off mid-word. I told them there was a severance and an ENDA, and I told them honestly that there was a goodbye email written in my voice that I was supposed to send them, and that I hadn't, and that I wouldn't, because they deserved to hear the real thing from the real me one time. And then I ended it the only way I know how to end anything, with the same line I'd said to every one of them on their first day, turned around and handed back. I wrote, whatever you decide, you owe this place nothing. Don't do anything for me. But you should hear it true, once, from the person who hired you. I read it twice. I fixed one typo. And I looked at the Marigold, greener now, the water doing its slow work, my father's plant deciding to live. And I hit send to 31 people in 31 homes on a quiet weekday morning, while $180,000 sat unsigned on my kitchen table, and a badge with my name on it blinked red in a building I no longer owned. Then I set the phone face down, and I waited. And I want you to understand something about that moment, because it's where I'll pick this up. I had no plan for what would happen next. I didn't know if anyone would answer. I didn't know if one person would answer, or none. I'd kept my promise, and keeping a promise is not the same as being saved. I'd just given away the money, kept only my name, and sent 31 people the truth with no idea what they'd do with it. Across town, Grant was planning a party to close the raise. Bram Kessler was lining up the press. Delia was already scheduling the smooth transition. All of them believed the exact same thing. They believed it was over. They believed it was contained. They had no idea what was already moving in 30 quiet houses, or that one of my engineers had just opened a blank document of his own and started to type. For 36 hours, nothing came back. I want to be honest about those hours, because they were the hardest part. Harder than the all hands. Harder than the badge. When they take your company, at least you know what's happening to you. But when you send the truth out into the quiet and hear nothing, you start to wonder if you imagined the whole thing. If maybe you were the crazy one. If maybe a nice feature was all you ever built. I did small things. I watered the Marigold again, even though it didn't need it. I made coffee I didn't drink. I checked my phone, and then I made myself put it in another room, and then I went and got it. Across town, they were celebrating. I know that now. I've pieced it together since, from the people who were there. Grant had booked a private room at a place downtown for the Rays close. He'd ordered the good champagne. Delia was already building the transition deck, the one with my name in past tense, the org chart clean and Grant-shaped. Bram Kessler had a call scheduled with a reporter he trusted, the friendly kind, to place the story before anyone else could. Founder steps back. Seasoned CEO takes the wheel. $48 million to prove it. They believed it was contained. Every one of them. And why wouldn't they? They'd done everything right, by their own rules. They'd stripped my 31% down to about 4%, with a clause I'd signed myself in 2021. They'd handed me $180,000 and 72 hours in a pen. From where they sat, I was a woman with a choice between money and silence. And the smart choice made itself. They forgot there was a third choice, the one I'd already made. Here's what they couldn't see. In 31 houses, that message was being read, not skimmed. Read the way you read something you've been waiting for without knowing it. A team member named Tasha told me later she read it 3 times, standing at her kitchen counter. And on the 3rd time, she stopped skimming for the facts and just felt it. The photo already swapped. The email written in my voice. The line about owing the place nothing, handed back to her the same way I'd handed it to her on her first day. But not everyone felt sure. I want to tell you about the wobble, because it matters, and because it's the most human part of this. There was a senior engineer. I won't say more than that. He'd just closed on a house. First house. A real mortgage, the kind that wakes you up at 3 in the morning doing math. He read my message, and he believed every word of it. And he was scared. Because belief doesn't pay a mortgage. Principle doesn't cover a payment. He typed out a reply to me 3 times and deleted it 3 times. He didn't know what the right thing was. He only knew the cost of it. I didn't know any of this was happening. I want to be clear. I sent one message, and then I went silent. On purpose. I made no calls. I asked no one for anything. I'd learned the hard way that loyalty you ask for out loud isn't loyalty. It's pressure. So I sat in my house and I let them be free. All 31 of them. Free to do exactly nothing. And I meant it. But one of them wasn't sitting still. Jonah Reyes was employee number 1. The first person I ever hired. Back when Marigold was me and a laptop and my father's Marigold on a folding table. Jonah had a jaw that set when he got quiet. And he'd been quiet at the all hands. Hands set quiet. I saw it and I thought he was just uncomfortable, the way you are when you watch something ugly happen to someone. He wasn't uncomfortable. He was deciding. That night, while I was watering a plant and losing my mind in a silent house, Jonah opened a blank document. He didn't call anyone. He didn't start a group chat asking who was in. He just started to build the thing the way we'd built everything at Marigold. Quietly, carefully, with receipts. He took a screenshot of the badge system showing my access revoked at 8:02 in the morning, before I'd even reached the building. He got a photo of my nameplate in the cardboard box on the reception counter, because someone had left it there for 2 days, and no one had the heart to move it. He had the phone recording from the all hands, the one somebody near the back had made, where you can hear Grant's voice clear as a bell. You built a nice feature, Maren. I'm building a company. He had my message, the true one. And he had the goodbye email, the fake one, because I'd forwarded the draft to the team as proof. The actual words they'd written for me to say, in my own voice. He laid it all out. And then above it, he wrote a letter. Not a manifesto. Jonah wasn't a manifesto person. He wrote it plain. He wrote what he'd seen with his own eyes over 8 years, and what he'd seen in the last 4 days, and he let the receipts do the shouting, so he didn't have to. Then he did the one thing I would never have asked anyone to do. He sent it quietly to the other 30. Not with an ask. With a question. He wrote at the top, "I'm going to post this the morning of the close. You don't have to sign it. You don't have to walk. But if you're going to, do it that morning, so it means something. Whatever you decide, you owe this place nothing." He used my line. He turned it around and handed it to them. The same as I had. The same as I had to him 8 years before, on a folding table, next to a Marigold. And then, in 31 houses, 31 people made a decision in the dark, alone, without me watching, without me asking, which is the only way a decision like that is ever real. The raise was set to sign on a Thursday morning. I've thought a lot about what mornings mean now. That morning, Grant put on a good shirt. I know because there are photos of the day that never got used. He went to the office early. He was, by every account, in a genuinely good mood. The best mood. The champagne was on ice. The reporter was primed. Bram Kessler was flying in. All they had to do was gather at 9, run the stand-up like a normal day, and sign the papers that made Grant the real operator the money respected. At 8:14 in the morning, the first resignation email hit his inbox. He barely noticed it. One person. People leave. He was refilling his coffee. At 8:19, the second one came. Then the third at 8:20. By 8:30, they weren't coming one at a time anymore. They were coming in a wave. 10 minutes of a phone that would not stop. Notification stacking on notification. Each one a name he knew. Each one 2 lines long. Each one polite and cold and final. 29 of them. 29 out of 34. Same morning. Same hour. No two worded quite alike, which is how he knew, finally, that no one had made them do it. He walked to the stand-up room at 9, the way you do when your body is still following a schedule your mind has stopped believing. And he opened the door. I wasn't there, I want to say that plainly. I never set foot in that building again. But I've heard it described so many times by so many people that I can see it like I'm standing in the doorway. The chairs were empty. Not most of them. Almost all of them. The room we used to cram past capacity, where people sat on the floor and leaned in the doorway, and it held 4 people and a whole lot of air. The whiteboard still had my roadmap on it from 3 weeks before, my handwriting, the arrows I'd drawn, the next 2 years of the product mapped out in blue marker that nobody had erased. They say Grant stood there and read a resignation aloud. Number 17, someone thought. He read it out loud to a room with nobody in it to hear. I don't know why he did that. I've decided not to guess. Maybe he was trying to make it real. Maybe he was trying to make it not real. Maybe when the thing you thought was a cap table turns out to be a room full of people, and the people are gone, you just start reading names, because names are all that's left. At 9:11 that morning, Jonah posted the letter. He didn't send it to a reporter. He didn't leak it. He just put it out in the open, where anyone could see it, receipts and all. The screenshot of my badge revoked at 8:02. The photo of my nameplate in a cardboard box. The goodbye email they'd written in my voice, word for word. The one I never sent. And the recording. The recording played, and played, and played, all day, everywhere. You built a nice feature, Maren. I'm building a company. Turns out that when you say the quotable line in public, the public quotes it. It traveled the way true things travel, which is faster than lies, though not always, though not usually. But this time, yes. By noon, it was in 2 industry newsletters. By evening, the recording had a life of its own. The comment sections filled up, and I read them. I'll admit I read every one. And the strangest thing happened. They weren't about me. Not really. They were about every person who'd ever poured years into something and watched someone else's photo go up on the wall. People I'd never met were telling their own version in the replies. The city they'd built from. The thing that tried to erase their name. Now, here is where I have to slow down. Because the easy way to tell this next part is to say the rays fell apart and the villains got what was coming. But that's the report form version. And the report form version is a lie of laziness. What actually happened to specific people, in specific rooms, at specific hours. and each of them deserves their own. Start with Grant. Grant spent that morning refreshing the resignation count. That's the image I can't shake, the one the people there gave me. Not raging, not throwing things, just sitting at his desk hitting refresh, watching a number climb. 22, 25, 27, like it might stop if he watched it hard enough. And then, when it was clear the number was the whole company, he did the most Grant thing there is. He opened a blank document and he started to draft a post. We wish them well. That was the tone he was going for. Gracious, above it. A leader weathering a hard day. He wrote something about how change is difficult, and how he respected everyone's decision, and how Marigold's mission was bigger than any one person. He wrote the phrase bigger than any one person about a company he had just tried to make entirely about one person, himself. And he did not hear the echo, because Grant never heard the echo. That was the whole problem. That was always the whole problem. He posted it, and it landed in the middle of a comment section that already had the recording playing on a loop, and it aged, in real time, in front of everyone, like milk in the sun. Nobody believed it. Not one person. The replies were merciless in the specific way the internet is merciless, which is that they were funny. And being funny about you is worse than being angry at you. You can survive anger. Anger burns out. Being a joke follows you. Then the empty floor. At the exact hour the raise was meant to sign, the engineering floor was empty. I keep coming back to that, because Grant did too, later, in the one honest sentence he ever said to a mutual friend. He said the quiet was the thing he couldn't stand. 8 years I'd filled that floor one hire at a time, by hand, every one of them, and it took a single Thursday morning to empty it. The machines were still on, the screen still glowed, the coffee was still hot in the pot somebody had made at 8 a.m. before they read Jonah's letter and stood up and left. A company hollowing out in real time, with the lights still on. Now Bram Kessler. Bram was the one who read spreadsheets and never read the room, and that morning the room finally sent him a bill. He was on a call. Northlight's conference room, Grant on the speaker, and I've been told about this call in enough detail that I can hear Bram's voice, flat and careful. The voice of a man doing arithmetic while a building burns. Because here's the thing about the $48 million. It was never really about me. Investors don't care about founders' feelings. What they care about is buried in the term sheet, in the language nobody reads out loud at the celebration. And Northlight's term sheet had a key team retention condition. At least 80% of engineering had to stay for 12 months. It was the load-bearing beam of the whole deal. Bram had put it there himself, to protect his money, to make sure the people who actually knew how the thing worked didn't walk out the door. 80% had to stay. 29 of 34 had just quit. And there was a second clause, the one I'd read in a bad week years before and never forgotten. A material adverse change clause. If something happened that fundamentally damaged the company between the handshake and the signature, the money could walk. A public letter, with receipts, playing a recording of the CEO on a loop, the entire engineering team gone the morning of the close. That's not a bad news day. That's a material adverse change. They tell me Bram was quiet on the call for a long time. Then he said the sentence that ended it. He said, "Grant, the story is the diligence now, meaning I don't need to investigate your company. The internet already did, and what it found is playing on repeat with your voice in it." Northlight pulled the $48 million, not in a week, not after deliberation, that afternoon. The wire that was supposed to make Grant the real operator the money respected never left the account. The money read the room, even though the man who managed it never could. Then, Doug Feld. Doug was the board chair, the early investor, the man who signed whatever Grant handed him. Doug's whole strategy in life was to not be the one holding the pen when the music stopped. And months before any of this, I had sent the board an email. A real one, dated, sitting on a server, that said in plain words that if we gutted the trust of the team to make the cap table cleaner, the company would break. Doug never replied. None of them did. That email was in Jonah's letter too. So when the board got on the phone that afternoon, in the wreckage, everyone was reaching for the same pen to hand to the man beside him. Doug blamed Grant for moving too fast. Grant blamed Bram for the pressure. Bram blamed the board for the governance. And somewhere in that call, somebody read my warning email out loud, the one Doug had ignored, and the room went quiet. Because there it was. I'd told them. In writing, and they'd filed it under things that were my problem and not theirs, right up until it became the only problem any of them had. Doug resigned from the board a few days later. For personal reasons. That was the phrase. For personal reasons. And Delia. I have complicated feelings about Delia, and I'm not going to pretend I don't. Delia was VP of People. She was the one who carried the paperwork into the room, the ENDA, the severance, the goodbye email printed out, and slid it across the table to me with a face that was trying to be kind while it did something that wasn't. She wasn't the architect. She wasn't Grant. She was just a person who wanted to keep her own seat, and she decided that keeping it meant handing me a pen. Here's what she didn't understand until she read Jonah's letter, same as the rest of the world. Every document she'd processed was in it. The ENDA, the severance figure, the pre-written farewell email in my voice, the one she'd printed on company letterhead. All of it, screenshotted, public. The careful paperwork that was supposed to make the whole thing clean and legal and quiet became the exhibit that proved it was none of those things. She'd built the evidence herself, page by page, and handed me a copy, and told me to sign. She realized it, I'm told, in a meeting, mid-sentence, and stopped talking, and didn't finish. The raise collapsed within days, not by my hand. I want that on the record. I never filed a lawsuit. I never called a reporter. I never asked a single person to walk. I sent one true message to 31 people, and Jonah wrote one plain letter, and 30 people made a choice in the dark. The company came apart on the exact beam I told them was holding up the roof. I didn't push it over. I just stopped being the thing that held it up, and it turned out I'd been holding up more than my share. That was the winner. I'll tell you about the fall. 8 months later, there's a small office. Not the old one, a smaller one, cheaper, with better light, on a street where you can hear the traffic and somebody's dog. There are 9 of us. 9 of the old team. Jonah's here. Tasha runs product. Priya does the design. And the whole place looks like something a person made instead of something a spreadsheet approved. The senior engineer with the new mortgage is here too. He walked, that morning in the end. He told me about the 3 deleted replies over a beer months later, and he told me he decided at 8:40 that Thursday, standing in his new kitchen, in the house he was so afraid of losing. He said he figured out that keeping the house wasn't the same as being able to live in it. He sent his resignation at 8:44. He was number 19. The Marigold is on the windowsill. I brought it back. Those brown leaves, half of it gone from a week in a cardboard box. My father's plant that I thought I might lose. I cut back what was dead. I gave it good light, and I gave it time, which is all it ever wanted, and it decided again to live. It's blooming now. Orange and gold, the exact color my father used to grow along the back fence, the color that made me name the whole company after a flower, because a marigold is a hardy thing that looks delicate and isn't. We do the same work we always did. We get underpaid caregivers paid on time. That was the whole point, from the beginning, for my father's aide, Rosa, who went 6 weeks without a paycheck while she was holding my father's hand through the end of his life. Rosa came to his service. I never forgot that. I built 8 years of a company so that the next Rosa would get paid on Friday, every Friday, no matter what. Last week I was standing at that window with a cup of coffee, and my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the platform. A caregiver, 3 states away, a woman I'll never meet, had just been paid. On time. Full amount. The little green check mark that means someone who wipes brows and lifts bodies and sits through the long nights got her money the day she was owed it. I stood there, and I drank my coffee, and I watched the Marigold, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, completely still. People ask me if I won. I never know what to say to that, because I didn't get my company back. I don't own Marigold. The name still exists somewhere, a shell, marked down to nothing. Northlight marked their investment to zero and never returned for the sequel. I didn't get the $48 million, or the 4%, or even the $180,000 that's still sitting unsigned in a drawer somewhere in my old life. But here's the thing I finally understand. The thing that took 8 years and one Tuesday to learn. I thought loyalty flowed up the cap table, up the org chart, up to the people who owned the most. That was my blind spot, and it nearly cost me everything. Loyalty doesn't flow up. It flows sideways, through the people who did the work next to you, through the hands that ran the thing, not the names on the paper that said they owned it. Grant believed a company was a cap table. He was wrong, and being wrong in public cost him everything he thought he was buying. You can push out a founder. You can swap her photo on a wall before the vote is even public. You can strip her equity and box her nameplate and deactivate her account mid-sentence. You cannot push out the promise. The promise walked out on its own 2 feet, 30 pairs of them, one Thursday morning, and it took the whole company with it, because the company was never the cap table. It was always the promise. A few dry things to close the ledger, because you'll want to know. Grant's next deck, the one he took around a year later, opened with the words founder-led. I heard about it from someone in the room, founder-led, and not one of the founders he'd led was there. None of them came. Bram Kessler's fund marked Marigold to zero and passed on the sequel when I quietly started something new, which was fine. The room reads different when you're the one who's already been through the fire. Doug Feld signs different things now, at a different board, a smaller one, where I'm told he asks a great many careful questions before he puts his name to anything. He learned exactly one lesson, and it was the lesson about the pen. And Delia sent me a connection request, months after. No message, just the request, sitting there, waiting for me to make it easy for her. I let it sit. That was the whole reply. Grant texted once too. Coffee sometime? 2 words, like the 8 years and the Tuesday and the 29 resignations were a scheduling problem. I read it. I didn't answer it. I just left it there, on read, which is its own kind of sentence, and went back to the window. That's the story. That's the whole of it, told Calm. A year and change later, from a small bright office with a blooming Marigold and 9 people I'd hire again in a heartbeat, doing the only work I ever wanted to do. If you ever gave years to something that tried to erase your name, then you already know the part I can't put into words. And I'd like to hear it. So tell me the city you're building from. Comment it below. I want to see how far this one travels, and I want to know I'm not the only one who learned it the hard way, that they can take the building, and the badge, and the wall. They can't take the promise, and they never see it walking out the door until the floor is already empty. The notification came through on a Thursday morning. I remember because Jonah had just made the second pot of coffee and set it on the counter without saying anything, which is the only announcement he ever makes that anything good is happening. The platform had processed an overnight batch. 41 caregivers, paid. 3 of them in the same zip code where my father's aide used to live. It's a number I know because I looked it up once, and I've never been able to not look it up since. One of the 41 had waited 11 days on the previous platform. She'd filed a dispute ticket that was still open when we migrated her. Paid in full, Thursday 6:14 in the morning, while she was probably still asleep. That's the work. That's what the 8 years were for. Not the cap table, Not the Series C, not the term sheet with its key team clause and its material adverse change language and its clean narrative. The woman who waited 11 days, paid at 6:14. I don't say this to be sentimental. I say it because it's the only number in this entire story that matters. The Marigold is on the same windowsill where my father kept it, in the same clay pot, which I know is a coincidence in dimension and nothing more. But when the light comes through in the afternoon the way it does in that office, we're on the 3rd floor, facing southwest, so by 2 o'clock the whole room goes warm. The color of it is the color I remember from his kitchen table. The same orange into rust at the petal edges. It bloomed about 6 weeks after I brought it back inside and gave it decent light. Plants are forgiving that way. They don't hold the box against you. The 9 people in that office chose to be there, which is a thing I never took for granted before, and now I'm constitutionally incapable of taking for granted. Jonah brought his own keyboard, the mechanical one that sounds like small rain on a tin roof, and he set it on the desk next to the window seat without asking, because we don't have assigned desks, because I told everyone on the first day that the desk you use is the desk you want, and a desk is furniture, not an org chart position. And if you decide tomorrow that you want the chair by the door, you take the chair by the door. We had that conversation once. We have never needed to have it again. Tasha runs product. She has a corkboard above her monitor that holds a single index card on which she has written, in red marker, the sentence, "Does it pay her faster?" Every feature idea goes past that card before it goes into the roadmap. I didn't ask her to put it there. I didn't know it was there until the 3rd week, when I walked past to refill my mug and stopped. Because I thought for a moment I had written it myself. It sounded so exactly like what I meant all along. Priya's design work is quieter than it used to be. Cleaner, she said once, in passing, that she stopped trying to make things beautiful and started trying to make things clear. And the funny thing is that now they're both. I think that happens when the work is for someone specific. You can't be decorative about something you care about. The care presses through. This is the company. 9 people, a clay pot, a corkboard card, and the second cup of coffee on Thursday morning when the batch clears and 41 people open their banking app and find what they were owed. You can rewrite the org chart. You can swap the photo on the wall. You can press send on the farewell email and hope the name at the bottom is enough to make it true. You cannot replicate what it took to build the thing that worked.